What's happening, gang? You are back live in the Secret Stash. We're hanging out with Rick Boyer, owner of Lofts of Rick Boyer. And you catch him, by the way, at boyerlaw.net or 858-481-8757. And we're also streaming this whole conversation live right now. So if you want to text Rick any questions live, we'll read them on the air. Hopefully get your answers. I got a couple questions for you, my man.
Go.
We'll call this the hot seat, even though we got the cool local people. So maybe this is the cold seat, right?
We'll see. I'll let you know.
Now, we talked last segment about the two things you got to look out for. Make sure you're not getting frauded. Kind of same family, but a little bit different spin on it. Like the concept of failure to disclose items. Would you not agree this is probably the lowest hanging fruit for things that you need to get involved with in a real estate transaction?
Yes, both on the seller and buyer side. I get calls from sellers all the time wanting to know whether they need to disclose or should disclose particular issues about their homes.
And the answer typically would be?
Disclose.
Exactly.
I tell them it's better to over-disclose than to under-disclose. So.
Agreed. Yeah. I think I've yet to witness a real estate transaction blow up because of over-disclosure.
Right.
You know, hey, and I'll knock on wood for that. Maybe it should be my head.
No, honesty, and I think it's also karma. You know.
Yeah, fair enough.
If you're honest with the buyer, that comes back. That comes back to you somehow.
Well said. So inside of that space, okay. So I don't know. Maybe you can think of four. Maybe just get me kind of close. I know there's more than one, so we'll confidently agree on that. But there's going to be some things that could kill your next purchase deal if they're not at least on your radar.
Sure.
So what would the first one be?
Well, are you talking about killing it during escrow, after escrow? What do you...
So for example, we kind of talked about this last segment, but like the whole water and mold thing.
Yes. Okay, right? You're right. That would kill a deal in some cases, and that's where I get a lot of real nervous sellers calling and saying, I've had a water intrusion in the past. I'm concerned that if I disclose that's going to turn off a buyer. That's going to kill my deal. What do I do? And so I need to find out more about it for one thing. But my personal opinion is if it's been discovered, if it's been handled properly, the mold has been remediated, the problem has been fixed, the leak has been fixed, then I say, only a real paranoid buyer is going to walk away from that transaction.
Agreed, because what your experience has taught you, and what I'll raise my hand and share as well, is every house has mold.
Right.
Okay? Every house has mold. The only question is, how much mold, right? And then / is it the scary kind?
Yes.
Right? Because there's a couple scary kinds that can do havoc to your lungs and overall quality of life, etc.
That's true.
Mold needs a couple things. It needs what? It needs water. It needs its food source.
Yep.
It needs oxygen.
That's right.
And usually, like, the more oxygen, the better. So if there's like a breeze kind of thing, that's where it takes off like wildfire.
Yeah,
literally,
and
like
generally
wildfire.
it needs dark. So
bingo.
Yeah, if you can put sunshine, air, and dry out areas, you usually can handle, at least keep mold away.
Right. Yeah. And so here's the thing. You mentioned the word remediation. So a lot of people get real spooked about mold, as they should, but it's been kind of blown up a little too melodramatically, because the truth is you cut off the food source, you kill the thing, right? So that's going to be actually treating the thing itself, like right. So they bleach the studs or whatever, they'll cut off the dry rock that got affected, and then they'll cut off the ability of how it happened in the first place, either like a leaky sink or
the source of the water,
a draft or whatever, and then it's done.
Right. And the companies that go out and remediate these situations are very good. They know exactly what to do.
Bingo.
And when they get done, they'll do a clearance test by a hygiene lab, they call them. They'll go out and test for any mold spores in the air, and generally they'll give you a clearance test, and you can go back in comfortable that they've taken care of the problem and gotten rid of the mold.
Well said, my man. Point for that. Adrian, would you keep score on this, please?
How many points do I have now?
Okay, good. Now, another one that we talked about, but I want to frame it a little bit different of context. We talked about the crack slab thing when you were issuing the subsidence, but so like this in a failure to disclose situation, okay? Like, what do you do, right? So is there something that, let's say a buyer, let's just make it simple, right? So let's say a buyer's going through a home inspection. What can they do to make sure that they're not victim to the failure to disclose?
Well, buyers have an obligation to make an inspection, what we call a diligent, reasonable visual inspection. So they should certainly do that. They should poke around. They should walk around the outside of the property, look at the foundation, look for any obvious cracks.
Well said.
Look for any obvious repairs that have been made. And
recent wall patches around door
exactly
jams, windows.
If the flooring has been replaced recently, you might ask to see if there's any photographs of the slab underneath.
Ooh, that's a good one.
And ask why the slab was replaced, and get the seller on the record of whether they saw any cracks, whether there was anything for them to be concerned about. And a lot of times, if you directly ask those questions, it will, if not garner an honest response from the seller, at least it'll help you if you end up getting into a dispute down the line.
Well said, well said. And I'll only add that in the same...
Wait a minute, no point for that one?
No, hold on. This is now... Before issuing the point, because you've already got it, but I want to follow up similar to how we did for mold, which is, let's say there was a crack slab. Okay? Let's say the seller did disclose it, and they actually did successfully get like a contracting foundation contractor out there, an engineer, they stamped off on that stuff. Should you still be concerned as a buyer?
Well, concern, yes, but whether it would make you walk away from that transaction, it just depends. All these... Every transaction.
You can't say it depends because you're a lawyer. It's impossible.
But there's no black and white in the situation. I'm sorry to say, and rarely is there black and white in the law anyway. But I would always say that get a second opinion. Get your own structural engineer out there or soils engineer to do some testing. Take a look at what's been done. Take a look at the documentation that the seller has for their repairs. And a lot of times, if just like in the mold situation, if they've properly handled that problem and eradicated it, corrected it, then you can you may feel comfortable that you can go forward with that transaction. It may make you want to offer a little bit less for the property, but I think you can probably go forward with the transaction.
Man, you are one pathetic loser.
Oh wait, hold on, that was the wrong button. No, hold on, we got to ding.
Well, I was starting to get used to those dings. Felt like I was on a game show.
I need the da-dunk instead of that one. No, good. Obviously, point. Having fun with you, my man. Hanging out with Rick Boyer, by the way, BoyerLaw.net. What about boundary disputes? Now, I know we don't come across this a lot, like right in the middle of the heart of San Diego, right? It kind of almost is what it is. There's not too much left or right that's going to be going on. Maybe the neighbor's fence is slightly on, that kind of thing. Yeah. But where would this come up more often?
Well, actually, in the CAR forms, the California Association of Realtor forms, which are used in almost all residential property real estate transactions, they do say that the buyer should conduct a survey of their property, make sure that the property lines are where they're supposed to be and that sort of thing. Rarely does anyone do it in the city or in the suburbia areas. Am I saying that right? Suburbia.
Yeah.
But because you just assume that the property lines are where the fences are, where the walls are, that sort of thing. However, in a lot of the older towns like Del Mar and even out in East County a little bit, you get some older properties that where the property lines aren't where the walls are and where the fences are. So now I'm not recommending that everyone go out and get a survey every time they buy a piece of property.
Good point.
But most of the time where we find issues with boundaries, and that is having the boundary someplace other than where it appears or where the seller represents it to be, are in the rural areas where there's larger parcels, and there aren't necessarily fences on the property line. Sometimes
my pappy built that fence.
Yeah, exactly. Or there's a tree line that's been there forever, and the parties have just assumed that that's where the property line is. Maybe it was put there by previous generations.
Yeah.
So a lot of times people will find out, again, months or years after they've lived in a property, when they go to build something, that their neighbor comes over and says, "Oh, by the way, that wall is on my property, and now I would like you to move it because I want my property back." And then I hear from them.
Yeah, and what comes up for me? I just dealt with a situation like this over early part of summer in a house in Coronado, where the mom who had passed away, and I was representing her daughters in the sale, had just verbally agreed to the neighbor that they could take over some of her lot.
Right.
And you could imagine how fickle that was over in the block and a half from the beach in Coronado.
Oh, yeah.
When the other person had built this nice, huge 8-foot retaining wall on that blessing. Yeah. It was quite a thing to unravel. But that kind of stuff, happens all the time.
It does. It happens so often that it makes a relatively a fair percentage of my practice is dealing with these boundary disputes and encroachments.
Yeah. Keeps you employed.
Well, yeah, unfortunately for my clients,
Yeah.
and clients in general. That's why lawyers stay in business, is because there are disputes like this all over the place.
Love it. Good. 3 points, man.
Oh,
you're
thank
you're
you.
kicking butt right now. But here's the one I think which might be the most gray, to use your own word from a couple minutes ago. Zoning.
Yes.
Right. So get me into that mindset right now. Like, so where do you find disputes like this percolate most often?
Well, I get them a lot in leasing issues, which we didn't talk about, but a lot of times commercial businesses will lease a piece of property. I've had this come up surprisingly twice in the last year alone, where a business will lease a building and then go to a lot of effort to build out that space for a retail space. They move in, and then they find out that that space is not zoned for retail. That happens. But then in other areas where someone will buy a parcel of land expecting to build something on it, a house or something else, they'll find that the property is zoned differently than they thought it was, and they can't do what they intended to do. And I had a case just in the last couple of years where it was such a big deal that the buyer felt like he had bought a worthless piece of property. It was just worthless to him when he found out that he could not build what he wanted to build on it without spending more than the property was worth. So so it happens in a variety of situations. In that case, the seller knew about it and didn't disclose it.
Ooh. Because typically that thing would fall, you would imagine, on the buyer as part of their due diligence process.
Right. Or it would come up in the title search,
right,
or title report. In this particular case, it was buried in the title report, and it was termed in such a way that it just wasn't clear to the parties. And I can't even fault the broker in that case, because even as a lawyer, when I looked at it, it wasn't clear to me exactly what it was until we went and pulled the documentation on it to find out exactly how that affected the property. But we knew that the seller knew about it, because we had witnesses that where the seller had gone and spoken to a realtor to find out what the property was worth with that restriction in place, and knew that the property was worth much, much less than he sold it for. So he was basically dumping the property to someone who did not know about that problem.
Oh, my God, I'm hanging on the edge of my seat. How did that end up?
Well, luckily, I represented that buyer, the unfortunate buyer who discovered this 6 months after he entered into that deal. And with a lot of diligence and perseverance and we went to a couple of mediations and negotiations. We ended up not having to litigate, but we ended up getting a rescission of that deal for the buyer. And he ended up giving back the property, getting his money back, and all of his legal fees. So that worked out well for the client. My client.
And we got...
Oh, double ding.
Double ding on that.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So what I heard you say is with water and mold, obviously, you know, the need for there to be a professional remediation company to have been involved, right? And give that final pass, so to speak, after they've tested everything, good to go. That's what you're looking for. If it's a cracked slab, obviously you're hoping for some kind of photos or documentation, but you're also looking for engineers' reports stamped, you know, foundation concrete experts.
Yeah, some proof of, again, remediation.
Right, exactly. And then boundary disputes, you're probably not going to survey stuff if it's in town as much, unless there's some kind of red flag that may have come up as part of your due diligence process. But that's there for you, should you so desire, as part of your due diligence. Right.
And, you know, I mean, just so people know, you can spend between $500 and $2,000 having a survey done, depending upon the size of the property and what you need done. So it's not as if it's prohibitively expensive, but it's just the kind of thing that you probably aren't going to do unless, like you say, there's a red flag.
Fair enough. And then zoning, I mean, you're really, in my experience, you're really relying on the third-party information, like from the title and stuff, to make sure there's no red flags. You're going back over that stuff.
Generally speaking.
And then ideally, of course, the seller's purporting the zoning correctly in the two things.
Yes, and as you know, on those seller disclosures, there's a place for the seller to disclose any material facts about the zoning or restrictions on building that apply to that property that the buyer would want to know about.
Makes sense. That's why we got my man, Richard Boyer, live, Real Talk Radio San Diego, hanging out with us from our 10 to 11 o'clock hour, ESPN Radio 1700. The law offices of Richard Boyer. You can catch him at boyerlaw.net. And you're right up there in Solana Beach, right, Del Mar?
I am, just off the freeway in Solana Beach. just east of I-5.
Had a kid, 858-481-8757 if you want to call him about any questions that may have come up as a result of this or anything else real estate related. He's there to make sure he solves people's issues. Now, Real Talk Radio San Diego, we're going to be right back with our final thoughts and wrap up with Richard Boyer. Hang in there.